Welcome again to another rendition of Welcome to Fatherhood Interviews. My name is Sir Royce Briales, and I'm with my prestigious co-host, Dr. Raheem Young. How's it going, my brother?
Oh, everything's well, man. How things on your end?
Oh, man, no complaints over here, man. It's lovely in Chicago around this time of year. So I'm also pleased to showcase a few special guests that we have here. We have two people on the podcast today. This is a very special rendition. We have Jeff and Brian Becker. How you gentlemen doing tonight?
Great.
Yeah, we're good. When we found out about Welcome to Fatherhood, we're like, wow, we'd love to connect with you guys. And so we're excited to be able to have a conversation with both of you.
Man, likewise, the feeling's mutual. So without further ado, can you guys tell me, how many kids you got, what are their ages, and also what do you do for a living or for a purpose?
Yeah. So this is Brian. I'm the dad. Jeff is my son. I have one son and one daughter. They're both married and they both have one child. So I have a granddaughter and a grandson. And for a living, I'm self-employed. I'm a consultant. I work primarily with nonprofit groups on planning and how do they strengthen their leadership groups. And I do executive coaching. And I really think about what I do is trying to walk alongside people to help them rewrite their story ending so they're more powerful, they're more meaningful, they're more filled with hope. And so whether that's on individual level or organizational level, that's how I see the work that I do. And I'm an author and an author with Jeff.
Yes, and I'm Jeff Becker, co-author and son. And I am a new father. Me and my wife live out in Scottsdale, Arizona now. So it is 75 and sunny. I'll put that in there for you guys still in Chicago. But yeah, so our son is 7 months old. So I want to learn from you guys. And you hear every emotion that you guys know. But for profession, for purpose, I am we were entitled a mental performance coach. I've been in the basketball world my whole life, from the Division I side to the high school side to the club side, training side, and now as a mental performance coach, I work primarily with athletes and teams on how mindset affects performance. So it's kind of interesting, my dad works in the executive coaching world and leadership world. So we talked a lot about the book and ideas and stories for the book and creating the book. And now we talk a lot about leadership and culture and all those schemes as well. So it's, we're still growing together as a father-son relationship as well.
That's cool. So this is the first time we actually had a son and father on at the same time. So I'm gonna go ahead and get right to it. So Jeff, what was it like having Brian as a dad?
We'll probably get into our story and a little bit of our book, The Tender Lions. It's interesting because there's kind of 3 chapters, I would say, from 0 to roughly 13, 14, where dad was very involved. I looked at him and put him on this pedestal, and he had a cape and was very active and did everything we possibly could together. And then, there was the reason we wrote the book of family issues and a huge dip in our life and probably our relationship, our family relationship, and then rebuilding this and rekindling this relationship, which is probably why we wrote the book, to get to where it is now. And that was probably about 20 years old, getting back to now I'm 35, to healthy, striving friendship and relationship moving forward. So it's been quite the roller coaster, to say the least.
All right, my next question is for Brian. What was your favorite stage of development for Jeff? Let's say from the baby stage to toddler, which stage did you enjoy the most?
that's a really tough question because they're really distinct. You know, when they're little, I'm not trying to dodge your question, Sir Royce, but when they're little, there's so many fun things that they're learning and developing. And, you know, he's learning how to like hold the ball and say this and play the piano and things of that nature. And then there was that Jeff was a really fine athlete, grade school, high school, college. So there was a lot of really fun times. And my wife is a very, very fine athlete. She's in the Hall of Fame at Illinois State University for athletics. And so we would go to all kinds of athletic events. So there was a lot of fun and pride in watching that. And Jeff was not the best student. He would read a book only if he knew that he was going to be forced to, it was going to be on the test. But then when Jeff got to be about like 23 or 24, some spark lit in him about learning. And it was really fun to see that because he started pursuing reading this book, going to that conference, connecting with that guy, that leader, listening to podcasts. And so it was really fun to see him really come into his own and really get curious about how things work in the world. And so maybe now's my favorite time with him because, you know, we used to talk about, you know, like get your homework done. And now we're talking about like, wow, should we sell the condo and buy a house? Or how do I deal with my wife on this situation when we really disagree on these things? And there's not like a right way through. So the conversations are a lot different than they used to be.
So Jeff, like what sparked that, I guess, that change? Was it getting married and having your first child, or were you on that path before, before your wife and your child?
Great question. I think that what changed was just mentors, role models, people in your life. You know, you who you surround yourself with is who you become. And you know, I was a 22-year-old assistant coach at Northern Illinois University, and there was a guy, crazy guy, but by the name of Sundance Wicks. And Coach Sundance would read on these trips, and he was very kind of philosophical and but his energy, his contagiousness, he was just a magnet to the guys. And I was like, I need to learn, I need to work. And, you know, but from him, and you surround yourself with other individuals that just, you know, you respond to. And it's interesting because your dad is definitely that, for me, was that light for me initially. And then being in the sports world, you connect with coaches and those captains, those leaders, those guys you look up to as an underclassman. I think those are the one, my youth group leader, you know, in high school, was one of my biggest mentors and honestly changed the trajectory of my life. You know, so I think that's probably why I love what I do so much. And I love to give back so much in athletics, is because those were the people that really shaped me, especially when my father and my relationship was shaky during those times.
You know, one of the things that I saw about Jeff when he really got serious about being the teacher, being the leader once he graduated from college in sports, was that for him, basketball wasn't about teaching kids to win. For him, basketball was about how do you develop character in young kids. And you use basketball as the vehicle to develop character. And so that really was, for me, a turning point in why you do what you do, a real sense of purpose behind that.
What was it like for you, Brian, seeing that light bulb turn on for your son in that moment? Like how did you experience that from your point of view?
Well, I was proud of him. Two, I had seen so many parents in the athletic world really over control their kids, way too much pressure, way too much living vicariously through their kids. So I kept trying to pull myself back and not be the over controlling parent, and let him have his own way of that, and then try to be helpful if I could, because I'd not been down the athletic path. I was not a good athlete. I'm a musician in my spare time. And so, but I was really excited to see him come to light. And so whatever I could do to try to support that, and not be over controlling, let him make his own mistakes. I heard the other day, we don't learn from our experiences. We learn from when we reflect on our experiences. That's where the real learning comes from. And so how do I let him have his own successes and failures? And even though I'd been down that road before, I wanted to let him do it himself. So I'm really proud of him, and I still am. There are days, So, when Jeff was talking about a mentor to him, a youth director, you guys might know James Brooks. Didn't James grow up in western suburbs, and he's now the head of the Lawndale Christian Clinic, and just really, really strong leader, and a guy you may want to interview sometime in the future. I mean, he's really, really a marvelous leader in the community in Lawndale and western side of the city.
Yeah, I would love to get familiar. So definitely, if you would introduce us, that would be amazing.
We could do that. And I think about so the mini part of my story was when Jeff was a little boy, I had a job where I traveled too much, I worked too much, I partied too much. I got involved in pornography when I was a young kid, totally by accident. And that turned into interesting to obsessive to addiction when I was a young guy. And when the results of all that came spilling out when I was a young dad, it was devastating to my wife and to my kids. And well, you can ask Jeff what that was like, but I mean, that was having that James Brooks as a mentor to Jeff at that time. Jeff did not want to talk to me, but he would talk to James, and James didn't know what was wrong, but James knew something was wrong. And it was a safe and confidential place for Jeff to go to. So it was a vital piece of what happens when a kid gets angry at a dad, or the dad is absentee or abusive or whatever. So
I know that you said that you were a young father, Brian. How old were you when you had your first child?
Let's see. I'm 30 years older than Jeff. So I was 28 because my daughter's 2 years older than Jeff. So I was 28. Yeah.
Okay. So when you knew that you were becoming a dad, did you seek advice on like fatherhood and different things like that? Did you have mentors that you can go to?
Not very much. I as a young dad, I remember having like some inner fear about like, can I make a living here? Because before that, both my wife and I were working. And so we were blessed that she was home for a couple of years. I know some families don't have that option, and that was really important. But I had some fear about, can I make a living? I did have a couple of really good man friends that were very helpful, great sounding board, great supporters. We were also still are involved in a local church, and that was an important part for us. So we had some good support networks around us. I didn't go to my dad very often for advice. We didn't have hardly any in-depth conversations my entire life until the latter years of life, until I was like 45 years old. So I also, at that time, Raheem, I also was like headed into this addiction. And so I was really arrogant. I thought I had all the answers already, which is pretty typical of anybody that's in an addictive state. They're hiding, they're shameful, but then they have to pretend like they've got it all together. And so I was kind of in that mode as well, trying to pretend like I knew what was going on, even though I didn't.
What tools or what resources did you use to break from that addiction?
So there, Jeff, you want to, so I know you asked me the question, but Jeff does a better job of describing this than I do.
I would say I'll speak on the family perspective. and then you can, if you want to chime in after, but
Yeah.
in, in the book, we call it the 3 H's. And the 3 H's for us really consist of, honesty, help, and humility. Honesty, help, humility. And I think the big thing and if you look at almost any troublesome situation, hard relationship, this can really help anybody, I guess, and something that we're going through. But first and foremost, it was this honesty. My dad had to get honest with himself first. As he talked about is he hated the man that he saw in the mirror, and he saw it over and over and over and over again. And so it's, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to change, or you just got to kind of live with this? And my dad said that he would kind of take this secret to the grave, but for some reason, God, whatever, told him that he has to be honest, and he has to be honest with himself, honest with my mom, his wife, and then was honest with us as a family. And then that second H was help. So honesty and help is, as a marital couple, they had to seek help, professional help. So they saw counselors or therapists, and I think we had to get help as a family on how to have hard conversations. We had to get help on, it takes a village to raise a child. I'm not communicating with my dad at the time. I'm seeking out James Brooks or other mentors, and the village around us, the community around us, I think really helped my sister and I. And then that third one is humility. So honesty, help, and humility. And, there's no growth when there's this egotistical side to you, right? You have to be humble enough to know that we're not perfect, that we need to get better, that there is growth, but the humility side, especially for men, that vulnerability to open up and be honest. And, so yes, I would say the 3 H's, the honesty, help, humility was something that we really fell back on to help us through those times.
Yeah, let me just share just a bit about that. One, the honesty part was when someone's done something that they're really embarrassed about or ashamed of, the tendency is not to go, oh, hey, let me tell everybody what's happening. The tendency is to turn inward, to close down. Even if like you come home and you see that your kid has like broken a window or something, you go, hey, they don't open up like that. They close down. And so we all have that tendency. So it took a lot of inner voice, I've got to get honest. But, how does someone get honest about something that they know that honesty is going to hurt the people they love the most? So, man, that is such a battle, an inner battle. So I thought, I'm just going to go to the grave with these secrets. And then I realized that, the addict mind loves those secrets, and it just drags you deeper down. The help part, we're relatively smart people, but we had never been down that road before. So my own smarts or lack of it couldn't solve this. I needed outside perspective. And so that was really important. And then the humility part is that when the higher the stress level, the more people tend to like dig in, like try to control what's going on right in front of them. And so humility is so important, to not let anger or resentment or revenge, if somebody's been unfaithful or somebody's been beaten or experienced trauma, there's that inner part that like wants to get them back. And so humility is really important to keep the emotions low so you can have just normal conversations. And Jeff hit this on the head with the vulnerability part. Most of us were taught that guys aren't vulnerable. Guys don't cry. Guys don't, there's something there, and vulnerability is essential to getting at the core of these things. So, for the dad who's out there, or mom who's listening and like, wow, I'm not in a good place, be the leader and talk about the uncomfortable. Don't keep glossing over, because that just makes us softer emotionally. We need to go into the hard places and talk about the hard places. And it's okay. That actually strengthens our kids when we're willing to talk about the hard things.
So if you guys can talk about, you mentioned how you guys kind of mended things over time. What's your relationship like today? Like how has it evolved since then?
Yeah. Let me share just one point before we go to that, Sir
Yeah,
Royce,
sure.
and that is that when I got honest with my wife and then Jeff and his sister Anna, I mean, they were so angry at me. Number one, they were so angry at me, rightfully so, righteous anger. Two, they were afraid. Well, my parents get divorced. Will this become public? Well, I have to go to a different school. Well, can I stay on this team? You know, all this stuff. And then they were isolated because Jeff was 14. This isn't something you go to school and go, hey, listen, this is what's happening in my home. So he was angry, afraid, and alone. And I think that happens to almost every single kid when there are challenges in the home, whether it's lots of arguments, abuse, abandonment, infidelity, whatever. And when dad or mom leaves or whatever, that's the state they go into. And boys experience this much more dramatically, traumatically than girls. When I can still remember vividly, this is 20 some years ago, when I had that conversation with them, my daughter got up and walked down the street to her best girlfriend's house and poured her heart out to her. Jeff went to his bedroom and slammed the door. So think of the difference when you got something hard happen to you and you can have a safe and confidential place to share it versus I have to carry all this by myself.
Yeah.
So that's happening all over our country. You know, roughly a third of kids don't have good relationships with their dads. And so that's just happening everywhere. And it's, you know, it breaks our heart when we run into those situations so frequently. So sorry, I didn't answer your question, but I thought that was a key point that so many kids experience that angry, afraid, and alone thing. So what was the question again?
No, thanks for sharing that. That's definitely important perspective, you know, to really get that out there.
Yeah.
No, my question was how has your relationship evolved to this day?
Yeah.
I would say it just started with one conversation after another, you know, and even when I was 14, 15 years old and my dad would come back from, you know, recovery program meetings or whatever, and he would just say, hey, let's have the conversation, and hey, let's talk. And, you know, it was kind of like he broke the trust, you know, and I'd say at the leadership groups and sports teams is that you build trust like you're climbing a ladder one by one, but you fall off that ladder in one step. And he definitely did. And so it took us weeks, months, and years and just consistent experiences, right? That's what trust is shared experiences and shared beliefs. But that took time. And I think that I probably I've shared this very little. But I remember I was probably 20, 21 years old. It was after a college basketball game and walking out of the locker room. And for some reason, I still remember that he gave me a hug that he was, I think, a little like possibly even teary-eyed and was just like, I'm so proud of you. And I'm, you know, 15 years later, I still remember it. And it was kind of at that moment, I still remember like, I think we're past this, you know, this was 6, 7 years after that experience. That kind of broke all that, but it's conversation after conversation, being vulnerable, being open, and being honest.
Yeah, I'd come home from recovery meetings. When you come out of a 12-step meeting, it's like the only place on earth when you can be 100% honest and nobody's going to like wag their finger at you. They're like, come on, bring your story, keep coming back, keep telling your story, you know. And I'd go home and I would have, you know, occasionally have conversation with Jeff, and he was like, are you just like checking a box off here? Are you supposed to do this? Is this like an assignment? So he was just so skeptical. And who doesn't after they've been burned go back into the relationship and be very timid about that? You know, you're not going to just run right back in. You know, that's just so against our human nature. And I remember it was probably 5 or 6 years before I felt like Jeff and I really were back in as good or better place as before that. With my wife, it was at about 3 years before she said, I forgive you out loud. And so, you know, there's that thing on the inside that holds us back from wanting to, once we've been burned, wanting to trust that person a second time. And it's really vulnerable, really raw and really vulnerable in situations like that. But I do think that I was intentionally talking about things that I would never have talked to him about before. And I wouldn't have known to do that without getting help and talking to counselors, and getting some good advice on just how to be a dad and how to build relationships. And I just didn't know that before. I didn't see it in my own dad, who was emotionally, he was a hard worker. He was honest. He was faithful to my mom, but he also could be mean as hell. And, and my brother and I felt that, pretty regularly. And so there was very little real emotional kind of connection to my dad when I was a young guy.
Do you feel like that played a role in your addiction?
It was a part of it. When I was about Jeff's age, when I was 13, my dad was pretty rough. He wasn't like physically abusive all the time, verbally abusive frequently, once in a while, physically abusive. So I was afraid of him as a kid. That was one thing. Secondly, when I was about Jeff's age, I had an 18-year-old sister that died from a blood clot, and I was with her alone when she died, and I couldn't I couldn't resuscitate her. I didn't know what to do. I'm this little kid, and I carried a lot of guilt into my young adult days for the death of my sister. Totally unrealistic belief. If there would have been a team of neurosurgeons there, they weren't going to save her life. But in the back of my head, I had that little voice that said, you could have done something. You should have done something. Mm-hmm. And I heard that voice until I was 45 years old. And then the third thing was, so my dad, my sister, and then that's the summer that I discovered pornography completely by accident. And that became my safe place. I'd go there to numb out. I'd go there to fantasize and escape the hard emotional stuff. And I don't blame those things for me becoming an addict, but they were certainly part of the equation. And then I started making a lot of bad decisions along the way. And I have to own that.
So Jeff, so I know you talked about trust, and with that, like, it comes, I guess, grace as well to restore that relationship. How did you find grace for your dad? Was it like him showing effort to try to, restore it, or how was it for you?
Yeah, great question. Effort, but the word I'd put in front of that is consistent effort. I think that trust is very. I think everyone wants trust, but no one knows really how to build trust. And I say it with my sports team all the time, is everyone wants this strong culture and strong behaviors and strong trust, but how do we do that? And it takes time and shared experiences and consistency, and all of that is really hard. It's hard to be consistent. It's hard to build it, but again, brick by brick, conversation by conversation, month after month, year after year. I think my dad just kept showing up and kept being consistent. After that, I don't remember many times where we butted heads, unless I got in trouble because I was a knucklehead and I got caught something I probably shouldn't have done. But that's not me, right? So go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, everybody uses I'm exaggerating, but many people use the phrase, you have to earn trust. But you know what? I think that's a paradox. I think you just have to give it sometimes. And it's risky. Jeff at some point had to go, okay, whether I totally believe him or not, I got to let him back into my life. And he did come to me at some point and said, I'm still really mad at you because you hurt my mom. But he said, I know why you got honest with us, because he said, there's no way you could ever have integrity if you hadn't gotten honest about this. And that was a huge breakthrough moment for Jeff and I. And I don't even think Jeff remembers that conversation, but I remember the conversation because he was one of the first people in my circle of people that I really loved who was like, okay, I'm still mad at you, but I get why you did what you did. I get why you had to get honest about this. So, and that's hard. That's really hard. But that hardest day of my life was probably the most important day of my adult life, outside of the day Jeffrey was born.
So Jeff, this question is for you. So what kind of dad are you now? Like you're 7 months in. So how would you describe yourself as a father?
Work in progress. No, but it's interesting, and we actually wrote a chapter on it in the book called "Overly Competitive Parents." Since I've been in the sports world and the basketball world for, as a coach for almost 20 years now, I've seen it all. I've heard it all. I've experienced it all. From fathers cussing at their kid from directly behind the bench, to taking them off the bench, to a kid wanting to commit suicide because of the pressures, to a kid punching throwing a chair because he's so frustrated because of the pressures and the expectations from what's behind him in the stands. So I think I just through me and my own father's experience, to me, seeing worst case scenarios, and learning just what a leader and a role model is, I would say what I strive to be is present. What I strive to be is not a role. I don't want to be a role model. I want to be the example and anything and everything that I do. And that I think that exactly, let's go back to that word consistency. If I can be present, and I can live by example and lead by example, the rest will take care of itself. And I'm excited to see kind of where our friendship and relationship blossoms with it. And no, I am not ever coaching his basketball team ever.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned being present. If we had to do a family feud, we've done over 100 interviews. That would be the number one answer, is being present. It's a big one. Like, not just giving the kid a tablet, like actually sitting down with them, like, and seeing what they're doing and looking at them and talking to them about it. Like, hey, what's that for? Like being there, like not just talking about being there. You know what I'm saying? It's a difference.
Yeah, I think the iPhone or the PDA or whatever you want to call it, I think that's one of the greatest gifts and one of the greatest challenges to parents today, is knowing how to use it for good and knowing when to take it away, so that you can really be present. Because I can't be present when I'm looking at texts or social media or whatever with my wife or my kids or grandkids, and I know that they can't be present with me. And the research is really pretty significant about how too much social media really sort of dulls our ability to even have an emotional connection that's real. So how do you do that? Because it's not going away. It's just not going away. So how do you raise your kid in a world where they have to use technology, and the more they use it, the more that it can actually, pull them away from you emotionally? By the way, our research clearly shows that when dads don't have a strong emotional connection to their kids, that's one of the key contributors to when the risk factors pop up in the kid's life. Moms are incredibly important. Grandpas are incredible, but the dad is the biggest of the equation. If the dad doesn't have the emotional connection, that's the main causative thing for the risk factors that pop up in kids' lives.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, what, I know you posed the question, but what do you think that the answer is? Like, how do you raise a child, I guess, to be connected in the technological world?
I was fortunate in that there was no such thing as a PDA when Jeff was little. I got my very first gigantic computer when Jeff was probably, there were computers, but there were no games to play on it. There was no, they weighed 80 pounds. It's not like you put it in your pocket. So Jeff, what do you think? How do you, is there a formula?
Formula, I think, is just with anything, is and again, I'm learning from you guys because you guys have older kids than I do, but boundaries, just like anything else, boundaries, honest communication about why this is important, why this is not important. But also being, I think, open to discussion and not just being the dictator as well, and let them. I'm actually reading a really interesting book. I just started it. Oh man, I'm gonna blank on it now. So never mind. Pass on this one.
So I want to add to what Jeff is saying, and this is something I actually was thinking about this afternoon. The chapter, by the way, Jeff and I are both Christians, so that's part of what influences our thinking. And chapter 2 in the book is called Imago Dei. And if you grew up in the church, you might have heard that phrase. It's a little Latin phrase, but it literally means like made in the image and likeness of God. So if one believes that they're made in the image and likeness of God, then we're not God, but God like attributes with brilliance and emotions and heart and strength and the ability to judge and that sort of thing as well. So, but God says to us, you're mine, you're in my family because I gifted it to you. I gave it to you. And you can't do anything to mess that up. And God gives us grace. And so if I can raise my kids to believe that they're mine because they're in the family and they can't do anything about that, and I have to give them grace over and over and over again, so it's unconditional, then the child doesn't have to think, I have to compete, I have to get good grades, I have to make a big salary, I have to get into the right college, I have to have a big following in social media, because all of that's performance-based. And as soon as you're the best, somebody will knock you off of that little mountain, you know? And then so you're constantly striving for more and to do more and to be better. And that's an endless path. That's an endless path. Everything becomes performance-based instead of like, it's just a gift. It's a gift. And so if I can give Jeff a hint of that Imago Dei, where he doesn't have to feel like he has to perform to be loved, we've taken a huge step in the right direction. Huge step. And that's very counterculture, very counterculture.
That's a great answer. I like that.
That's a real good one, yeah.
Yeah.
Now go ahead. You had a
Chapter
question?
2.
My next question for you, Brian, is what type of grandfather are you?
Well, I don't know if I'm a good grandpa or a bad grandpa, but I can tell you this. When my granddaughter was born almost 5 years ago, I felt like I found a spot in my heart that I did not know that I had. I mean, I love my kids and I love my wife, but when that granddaughter was born, I just melted. And I have an amazing relationship with my granddaughter. The time we spend together, I'm totally not biased either. You know, and when I see little Bo Becker, my grandson, my heart just melts, and I just want to be around him and hug him and try to prop him up. And you know, I also know that there's a lot on the line right now. You know, I've been in recovery for 22 years, and I know that if that weren't in my life, I wouldn't be married. I wouldn't have a relationship. It would be a terrible relationship with my kids. I wouldn't have a strong relationship with my grandchildren. So there's a lot riding on my ability to just follow my values and to do what I need to do there. And if I can do that, so many other things in my life just fall in line. And so, you know, I hope I'm a good grandpa. I'm trying, and I don't want to be overly controlling either. I try to give Jeff and my daughter very little advice on how to parent. I did give you some advice yesterday, didn't I? And then I said, okay, I'm going to shut up now. So, because, you know, I'm always going to be his dad. There's actually a chapter in the book that's called "When Are You Done Being a Dad?" And I'm probably never going to be done being his dad. But the advice that I give him is a lot different now than it was when he was 12, you know.
Have you two ever have you ever played basketball against each other?
Oh, yes.
Go ahead, tell the story.
Well, when he was little, he could throw a baseball 70 miles an hour, and he could shoot 3-pointers when he was, in 6th grade. And he's 6'6", by the way. He doesn't look 6'6" on Zoom, but he is. And he's built like a Navy SEAL. And so at one point we were playing basketball in the driveway, and he said, "Dad, I remember when I became faster than you. I remember when I could throw the ball harder than you. Now I can outshoot you." He goes, "The only thing you've got on me now is weight." So, I'm like, "Well, thanks a lot. So I weigh more than you do." So, but yeah, we spent countless hours in the driveway and in the backyard and in the park, throwing the ball, catching. I wasn't a great athlete, but I had really good fundamentals. And so, like, how do you get the ball to follow, that sort of thing. And so, of course, my wife would take credit for that because she's actually the real athlete. So what do you think about that, Jeff?
Yeah, she's the athlete. She is the athlete for sure. Yeah. But she was also a lot more crazy on the sidelines than you were. So
I had to
the crazy mom screaming and yelling.
She would yell at the coach too.
Oh man.
Because she'd be like, "Why are you in a zone? You should be in a man-to-man." College coach. She's yelling, from the stands. She was right too. So Jeff, tell me like the burger story.
Yeah, so there's one of the chapters is called Time Matters, and it's just, I think that's one of the most important things with any father-son or anyone that would ask us for advice is that time matters. And I go back to always tell the story of, the 7-minute story. And here I'm 35. I remember this 25 years later is, my dad would cook burgers on the grill for dinner or whatever. And I know he put the patty on the grill. He would set that timer for 7 minutes before he had to flip the burger over. And then those 7 minutes were like the most important 7 minutes of my life. I had 7 minutes to shoot hoops, play horse, play catch, throw the football, play baseball, whatever it was. Like I was this 10-year-old boy, like so excited to have 7 minutes. And then the timer would go off, flip the burgers, 7 more minutes to just have that undivided attention with my dad. Right. And that's, if there's one thing that I would tell any father is time matters.
Mm-hmm. There's a single mom that lives across the street from us, and she has one little boy, and he's a great little kid. But a couple of weeks ago, his dad, they don't live together, but dad was there, and they were playing catch out in the front yard. I've never seen that boy happier. I've never seen him more engaged. And I just had to say to the dad, "You're doing something really, really important today." Just, it doesn't have to be a football, but just that time that you're with him, man, that's gonna go sink into him. It's gonna make an impression on him, because it's not about learning how to throw a football. It's him learning that you love him, you care about him, and you're willing to give from your schedule to be with him. And that's what really matters.
How was that 7 minutes for you, Brian? Like, what did you get during that time?
I can remember many days going in the house and saying to my wife, "My shoulder hurts so bad. I threw 100 fly balls today in the backyard." And I'm not kidding. And then when he learned how to throw a 70-mile-an-hour fastball, my palm hurt so bad from catching. I'd sit on a bucket in the driveway and he'd throw fastballs, but I'm just like, he loves doing it. And at that time I was still in my addiction. So I was having this constant Jekyll and Hyde moments of like, I want to be a good dad and I'm not a good dad. So whenever I had those opportunities, I really wanted to make them count, because I did not know at that point where my life was gonna end up. So make them count. It's never too late. never too late to take the first step in the right direction for anybody listening to this. And that could be, you might be 50 and your dad might be 75. And maybe you're the son that needs to take the step in the right direction because your dad won't take the step back to you. So never too late to take the first step. And I want to interview you guys. I want to ask you a bunch of questions.
That could be another. That could be a good one. We could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, right. I was just gonna ask, like, how did you and your wife, how were you all able to like reconcile things? Because it seems like relationships not really built like that anymore. It's like the first thing, first sign of trouble, I'm out of here. Things like that.
Well,
how were you all able to do it?
So she had friends that said, leave him, divorce him. And I really think that to this day, I've been married 39 years, by the way, and there was about 3 years in the middle that I just didn't know what was going to happen from one day to the next. And I really believe that it was about 4 or 5 of her good Christian lady friends who surrounded her, and listened to her, and spoke some truth into her. And they were saying, don't make this important of a decision when you're so angry. It's like if you're in the fire, you cannot think about fire safety. All you can think about is get out of the fire, So you need some time, you need some space. And they were marvelous in reminding her that she needed time and space. And I love my in-laws and my wife's brothers and all, but they are a family that knows how to hold a grudge. They're really good at that. It's like in their DNA. And so she hung on to that anger for a long, long time. And about 3 years into this, she finally came to me one day and she said, I know I have to forgive you, and I do forgive you. And she said, let me tell you, she said, I thought by not forgiving you, I could get back at you. There was like this inner resentment thing that was there. And she said, this is a really key part about forgiveness and why it's so important. She goes, I realized that my not forgiving you was holding me in place, not you. Because I had been getting counseling, I've been going to recovery meetings, journaling and hanging out with the right kind of people. And I was emotionally moving forward and kind of thawing out. And then she could see that. And she's like, wow, he's going to stay on this path. And so that was a huge breakthrough moment for us and for her to be able to, because that's huge vulnerability, huge risk to say, I forgive you. And she also said, I'm not sure I want to stay married yet, but that came a little later. So forgiveness is really for the person that's been wounded. It's not for the person that's done the bad thing. So, and that's hard for most people to get their head around if they haven't been in a situation like that. But I needed to, like Jeff used the word consistent, I needed to demonstrate day in, day out, that I was serious about changing my life. And I still am. So.
How did you maintain your patience for her, I guess, waiting for her forgiveness? Because, sometimes it'll be like, it's been 2 years. You still on that? You still talking about that?
So I continue to go to counseling regularly, going to recovery meetings regularly, which is a great place to be able to let the emotion of that go, to see yourself accurately if you're holding on to resentments or anger or whatever. And I was at that time thinking, one, because my counselor, who also did some counseling with my wife, he said to me, he says, I don't think she's ever going to forgive you. And so thankfully he was wrong. but he said, in my experience, because of her own family history and that, she could just hold on to this. And then you're going to have to decide if you want to leave or you want to stay in a relationship that will continue to have a contempt under the surface, which will smolder, and you're going to feel that resentment all the time. And I had resigned myself that if she hadn't forgiven me, that I couldn't stay in the relationship. And by the grace of God, it did happen. You know, I love it when marriages work, but not every marriage should work. I know that that's like, some people would like go crazy about that, but it takes two people to want to be in the relationship. And if somebody's been really dishonest or harming, unfaithful, and they're not repentant, then there's no hope for a really healthy relationship in the long term. So, yeah.
How
Good
long
question.
have you been married, Brian?
39 years.
Wow.
39. Yeah. I'm a fan of marriage. So yeah. My dad and mom were married 59 years before my mom passed away about 10 years ago. So, and my wife's parents have been married 65 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Talk about a lifetime.
Yeah. We stick it out in our family. Well, you know, my faith background says you said I do for the rest of your life, and you messed it up. Now go make it right. Make it right. And God bless that that commitment. And there was a healing that happened in that forgiveness that I really think was miraculous, because I'm not sure that either one of us like humanly possessed what it took to rebuild that relationship. And we have it's not perfect by any means, but it's a pretty dang good marriage. And she's a great grandma. She's an amazing grandma. She's right now, she's watching Bowen right now with Jeff's wife.
So you're in Arizona?
I am. Sunny Scottsdale.
Yeah.
And
we're visiting them.
77 down there.
Oh, man, beautiful. It was actually 55 in Chicago, so it wasn't, as bad. But,
not bad. Yeah.
How long have you been married, Jeff?
3 years now. 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So still newlyweds, technically, in the grand scheme.
Still learning, developing, growing, and getting. It's amazing, you think you know everything you need to know about your wife at marriage, and I'm learning more and loving it more. We keep peeling back those onion layers, and finding out more about ourselves and each other as this unit, as this team over the years. It just kind of gets better and better, I think.
So Jeff, I noticed you've got a couple like how to be a good dad kind of books on the shelf. How is being a dad different than you thought it was going to be?
It's a good one.
Yeah.
They say that a kid changes you. It definitely changes you. I just think it spotlights who you already are. I think it spotlights all of the insecurities and weaknesses and emotional instabilities you have. Like, I realized I'm a control freak. I realized that, I want things done my way, and I'm very type A and structured and disciplined and scheduled out. And, but I think it just magnifies who you already are. And then in those sleepless, stressless, or stressful arguments with your wife, things trigger you much faster than they did, a few years ago. So if you have the awareness and the self-reflection aspect, I think it only makes you better in those ways.
Yeah. So well, I'll interview him another time. This is your show. So.
Well, we can do it that way. So Jeff, if you had to ask your dad any question, what's a good question for your dad to ask your dad in this moment right now? You had to think of one.
All of the interviews and podcasts we've been a part of, no one's ever asked me. Here's a good one that I like to ask: is knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
Well, knowing what I know now, I would have sought counseling as a teenager. I would have sought that out, because I had a arrested development from the trauma when my sister died and how that all rolled out that I didn't know until I was in my mid-40s. And so I think that would have changed my life significantly about how I dealt with hard emotions and addiction and that sort of thing. And so that would have been one thing I would have done very differently. I would have been more honest and more brave about the issues that I was dealing with way early on. That being said, if all of those bad things hadn't happened in our family, Jeff and I never would have written Tender Lions. We wouldn't have this opportunity to talk with dads and their kids all over the place. And on my best days, I'm actually grateful for those hard things, because that prepared us to have a platform to talk to dads about how darn important this is to step forward and be strong and be vulnerable. And that's where the title Tender Lions came from, that paradox between strong and soft and tough and tender, and knowing when you need to be one and knowing when you need to be the other to be an effective dad and husband, or just a man in the community, you know.
Is your dad still around? Is he still with us?
My dad died 6 years ago when he was 92. He was born in the 20s. Depression, World War II vet. I'm 65, so I know I look much younger. But...
No, you do.
Oh,
No, I was gonna ask you, Brian. Well, pretty much the same question. If you could ask your dad any question, what would it be?
I'd love to know. Well, I'd love to know. I know why he was such an honest, hardworking guy, because he got that from his dad. But I would love to know where his anger came from, because I can't figure that one out. And man, he was verbally hard on my sister and my brother and my mom and I, in spite of being, you know, very honest and very hardworking and very generous guy. But I would love to try to figure out why so much anger. And I could never figure that one out. So, yeah.
Did he ever talk to you about the war? What was that like?
Not until his late years. He was very private about it, and when it would come up, he would almost always get tearful, and just not want to go there. It was his brother was in Pearl Harbor, and it was a very, very violent thing that his brother experienced and lived through, and it affected his brother tremendously in his life. And so, but it wasn't until later in my dad's life that he talked about that. And Jeff and I actually took him to Washington, D.C., and spent a weekend, you know, looking at the war memorials, and we just had it was the last couple of years he was alive. It was really a beautiful experience for all three of us to be able to do that. And in those last few years, my dad and I were able to talk about a lot of the really hard stuff that had happened years earlier. And that was a real blessing to be able to have some healing between he and I about some really difficult things earlier in our life. So never too late to take that step. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for definitely opening up and, you know, sharing your story. This is you know, stuff that us as men we need to talk more about, because you know, a lot of men out there are struggling and holding on to a lot of stuff that may have happened to them, or that they're currently doing, and you know, it's okay to talk about it. So you know, definitely thank you for opening up and sharing this. I would say my next question to both of you is, since you've written the book, like how did that help mend your relationship? Did that help bring you guys closer, or even closer than you imagined?
I'll start with that. I think it was at first he was like, we should write a book and all these experiences and stories and how to, you know, if we could rewrite time, what would we do differently? And I was like, no one's gonna read this. No one's gonna read this. But once we kind of he got me on the same page. You know, it took us almost 3 years from first idea to publish, you know, so for 3 years we spoke 5x, 10x more than we did, you know, in my 20s, or my early 20s, my mid to late 20s, because we were talking about stories and ideas and strategy. And then it was actually being published, and it's like, okay, we have a published book, but what do we do now? And so there was just, we would talk, and we talked about this actually just the other day before I had our son. We still talk about all the different strategies and ideas and growing this business side of the book. So it's not like we talked about some things were just checking in, but then it was also pretty cool to just remember stories, bounce ideas off each other. And obviously that led into other conversations just in passing, I think, over the last, 5 to 8 years now.
Yeah. I remember us actually sitting at some coffee shop in Phoenix like 6 years ago or whatever. And this was when we had decided that we were going to work on the book. And we just talked for hours about, like, if we could wind the clock back and raise you all over again, what are those most important things? And that's what ended up forming the chapters, the different themes for the chapters. And so we had to have really an in-depth conversation about those really important things, which was just a gift to me. And I know now that I need to back off a little bit, because Jeff's got to raise his son, and he needs to be a good wife, a good husband to his wife, and make a living and all of that. And I want more time, but it's not my time to have more time. He wasn't married then. And so so that was important. There's probably a Tender Lions 2 in the future, though. I think that there's reason to have a second book.
All right, so I know we're getting close to time. If you could give advice to any new father, or just a father in general, and this for both of you all, what would it be?
I'll go first. I would say, kind of circling what I've said a lot of is time matters, and I've kind of already told the 7-minute burger story. But the intentionality, the eliminating of distractions, the presence, being present. Because the thing is, I'm 35 years old, and I still remember my dad putting burgers on the grill 25 plus years ago, and I remembered vivid as day. And probably he doesn't remember a majority of those times. So for a 6 to 10-year-old, for me to remember that 25 plus years later, I think speaks volumes to that time truly matters for any father-son.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that raising a boy to be a man is way too important to leave to chance. And there are a lot of kids that are that's happening by chance. And so dads need to not be afraid to dig into their dark side, into their shadow side, and uncover that difficult stuff. And that, to some people, like to get counseling or whatever, it might sound like weakness. I think the guy who's willing to get counseling is brave and smart. When I finally got the courage to uncover a lot of that dark stuff in my life, I found that the seeds to the new life were in the dark all along, and I'd been trying to avoid all of that. And so, and that allowed me to talk to smart people, to get connected to the right kind of people who could, give me good advice. And so don't be afraid to reach out, whether that's a counselor or a pastor or a neighbor or, a college friend or a high school friend or whatever, who's got their feet clearly, or a grandpa who has their feet clearly on the ground. And women are so important in this world, but kids need their dads. And if the dad is not in the picture, then how do you bring other good men around those kids, so that way they can see it modeled, not just have someone tell them that it's important to be a good man, but they can see it in their life. And that has nothing to do with politics, race, income, religion. It's about being a good man and doing what's important for that kid and for society.
That's good stuff. So I have 2 last questions. So the first one is for you, Brian, is what's your favorite game that you've seen Jeff play?
the favorite one. It's a toss-up between when the head coach from Hope College came to watch him play, to recruit him, and Jeff had some amazing, like, off the screen 3-point shots, swish, swish, swish. And the head coach looked at me and went, I want Jeff at Hope College. I still remember that. And also when he was just a little guy, like maybe 7th or 8th grade, him pitching extremely well, hitting the cover off the ball, playing shortstop, and like scooping up fast, hard line drives, and just watching him just have total fun with his friends out there, and no pressure. He was just in his element, so he, anyhow.
And do you remember that game, Jeff? You okay?
It was at Ileana Christian down in Lansing.
Oh boy.
And the coach came down, drove over to watch you play, and he wanted you. And then he went somewhere else. So.
And the flip side to that question, Jeff, what's one of the games where you remember seeing your dad in the stands? Like one of those ones.
I don't think I can think of anything specific, but I can think of, I went to school at Augustana College, which was on the western tip of Illinois in the Quad Cities. It's about 2.5, 3-hour drive. We would play I think conference games were every Wednesday, Saturday. And they made almost every Wednesday game. And if I think about it now, I'm like, we played at 7:30 p.m., and college games last 2 hours. Game gets done at 9:30. They would wait for us to have our call, our talk in the locker room, probably shower up, come out of the locker room. So it's 10 o'clock at night, just for them to give us a quick hug, say hello, hopefully slip me a $20 bill maybe in college. And then drive home for 3 hours and then go to work wake up at 6:30 in the morning. And I don't remember them missing almost any games in my 4 years, whether I played or not. So that's what I remember most. I don't remember anything specific. I just remember the commitment.
Consistency, yeah.
That's amazing to me.
All right, and my final question to the both of you is, what does fatherhood mean to you?
You should have asked us that last week so we could think about that one a little bit.
The first word I thought of was everything. Everything from the fact of, you're going to be his first superhero. You're going to be his first role model. You're going to be his first Michael Jordan. And so I think that everything that he's going to have a lot of memories, whether good or bad. His behaviors are going to be shaped, whether good or bad, because of you. And I'm extremely excited for that challenge, and that because I think it's going to be the greatest, hardest game I've ever played, and I'm super excited for what's about to uphold for me, I'd say.
For me, fatherhood is one of the most important pieces. If you look at what holds the fabric of society together, it's one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. That's also one of the most missing pieces right now. And not many people are paying attention to it like you guys are. So we applaud you, we support you, we want you to be successful in the work that you're doing. And we know from our family experience, and we know from all the research we've done, that fatherhood, our fatherlessness, is a key component to what causes kids to struggle. And when boys aren't strong and they don't become strong men, then families struggle. So fatherhood is just absolutely key to the health, not only that one boy, but then how that moves itself into the broader society. And so whatever we can do to help support, provide structure, motivation to that, I mean, it's just absolutely vital to our society.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. And I don't know if he was going to say something.
No, go ahead, bro. You got it. Go ahead.
Before we get out of here, I just want to thank you too. Like I said earlier, this is the first time that we had like a father and son at the same time in the interview. And I just appreciate like you all's honesty and your ability to, be vulnerable with each other and to open up and be candid about, the past and how you all were able to overcome those challenges and everything. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So that's what someone asked us once, why did you write it? And I think our first response was to change one relationship. That's it. One father-son relationship. We know we've done our job. So we're probably still in the hole and we're probably still in the red, and we haven't made money off this. So we might as well pack some lives doing it, right?
Yeah, but we'll go anywhere and talk to anybody about any time about this. And so feel free to, if you find an organization or a church or a workshop or whatever media that wants to talk about father-son issues, we're all in. But are we still being taped, by the way?
Yes, we're about to wrap it up right now.
Sorry.
But before we do, I want to give you guys the floor to tell people where to find you. You have to give people a link or a place to go. Where would you send them?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
Everything on our social media is just at Tenderlines Book. And you can email us. I mean, our website is tenderlines.org, and email us info@tenderlines.org. But everything is pretty much at Tenderlines Book or tenderlines.org. You can find all, from inquiries of, speaking engagements to blogs to everything on there.
Yeah. And the book is on Amazon. And if somebody wants to purchase a whole bunch of them for a conference or something, then they should contact us directly, and we could work a really nice reduced rate for them to be able to do that. So, yeah.
Awesome. And Dr. Young, I know we kind of been having a tradition that we've been having great interview after great interview, but I would definitely qualify this as we used to call it Hall of Fame, but now we switched it to Hall of Fathers. So I would definitely like to qualify this as a Hall of Fathers episode. Dr. Young, do you concur?
Oh yeah, I second that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So if I had to hang 2 jersey numbers up in the rafters, what numbers would I be hanging up?
25.
25. That's a good one.
65, because I'm 65 years old.
Hey, that's a good number too. Nobody has that number, I don't think, in the Hall of Fame. Not yet. All right, so for myself, for Sir Royce Briales, for my prestigious co-host, Dr. Raheem Young, and also for our special guests, father and son, Brian and Jeff Becker. Thanks again for listening to Welcome to Fatherhood Interviews, and stay tuned for further announcements.